The Galactic Dominion ruled over 1,000 worlds, and its law was simple: the strong take what they desire, and the weak obey. For centuries, the Dominion's warrior species had fought, conquered, and expanded their empire. Humanity, a young race, had always been seen as weak, too soft, too fragile, too unworthy. Captain Elias Vance stood before the Dominion Council, his face calm but his eyes burning with determination. Around him, massive alien warlords sat on towering thrones, watching him as if he were nothing more than an insect. The largest among them, Supreme Chancellor Corzan, leaned forward. His dark crimson skin gleamed under the council chamber's light. "Human, your kind speaks of fairness and diplomacy, but this is not how the Dominion works. Strength is the only law." Elias met his gaze without fear. Then let humanity prove its strength. The chamber erupted in laughter. A dozen warlords, each from a different warrior species, grinned at the absurdity of his words. Elias knew why they laughed. The trial of Dominion, a brutal contest where warriors fought for power and honor, had never been won by a human. No human had even dared to enter it. A smaller warlord, a reptilian with gleaming black scales, sneered. "Your kind does not belong in the trial. You lack the size, the power, the will?" Elias interrupted. His voice was steady, unshaken. "That's where you're wrong." The laughter faded. The Dominion respected only one thing: courage. And Elias had just shown it. Corzan studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to the gathered warlords. "The human challenges the trial of Dominion." His deep voice echoed through the chamber. "To any object." Silence. Some warlords looked amused. Others seemed curious. But no one objected. Corzan gave a sharp nod. "Very well. The human will enter the trial. He may take what he desires, if he can." Elias stood aboard his ship, gazing at the planet Senax below. It was a world of endless battlefields, where the Dominion's greatest warriors trained and fought. In just a few hours, he would be sent down to the arena of Dominion, where he would face enemies far stronger than him. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Carter, stepped beside him. "Sir, you don't have to do this. The Dominion's warriors have spent their whole lives fighting. You've read the records. Most humans don't even survive the first round." Elias smiled slightly. "That's because they fought like humans. I don't plan to." Carter frowned. "What do you mean?" Elias turned away from the window, his expression unreadable. "They expect brute force. They expect honor. But we're not here to impress them. We're here to win." The arena of Dominion was a massive battleground, surrounded by towering walls of dark stone. The air smelled of metal and dust, and the roars of thousands of alien spectators filled the sky. Elias walked to the center of the arena. Around him, towering warriors from every corner of the Dominion gathered, their weapons gleaming under the artificial sun. Some were reptilian, some insectoid, others covered in thick armor-like skin. Every single one of them was bigger, stronger, and faster than him. A deep voice echoed through the arena. "The trial begins. Take what you desire, or be crushed beneath those who can." The battle began. Elias dodged to the side as a massive warlord, covered in bone-like armor, charged toward him. The ground shook under the alien's weight. Elias didn't fight back immediately, he observed. His opponent swung a heavy club, but it was slow. Elias ducked, rolled to the side, and let the alien's own momentum throw him off balance. Then, with a quick move, Elias pulled a combat knife from his belt and struck. The alien howled as Elias's blade found a weak spot between the armor plates. He stumbled back, clutching his wound. The crowd gasped. A human had drawn first blood. But there was no time to celebrate. Another warrior, a tall feline-like alien with sharp claws, lunged at him. Elias barely dodged in time, feeling the claws slice through the fabric of his uniform. He rolled to his feet, grabbed a fallen spear, and thrust it forward. The feline warrior twisted away, But Elias had anticipated the move. He swung the spear's shaft upward, catching the alien under the chin. The warrior staggered, and Elias finished him with a quick strike to the chest. 2 enemies down. The crowd was no longer laughing. Elias took a deep breath. His heart pounded, but his mind remained sharp. He wasn't here to fight fair. He was here to win. More warriors charged at him, but Elias had already planned his next move. Instead of engaging directly, he sprinted toward the ruins at the edge of the arena. He knew the Dominion warriors preferred honorable duels. They weren't used to humans who fought with strategy. He lured 3 opponents into a narrow passage between the ruins. There, their size became a disadvantage. Elias moved fast, striking at their weak points, using the terrain to his advantage. Within minutes, they lay defeated. The arena fell into a stunned silence. The Dominion warriors had expected Elias to be crushed within moments. Instead, he had outmaneuvered, outthought, and outlasted them. From his high throne, Corzin watched with narrowed eyes. "Interesting," he murmured. Elias stood in the center of the battlefield, blood staining his uniform, his breath heavy. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the fastest. But he was still standing. And that meant he was winning. The sky above Senax was a dull, stormy red, filled with swirling clouds of dust and smoke. Below, the arena of Dominion stretched for miles, a massive battleground where warriors from every corner of the galaxy fought to prove their worth. It was a place of blood, honor, and death. Elias Vance stood on the landing platform, staring at the arena gates. The heavy iron doors loomed ahead, carved with the symbols of the Dominion's warrior clans. Beyond them, the first round of the Trial of Dominion awaited. Beside him, Lieutenant Carter adjusted his tactical wrist device. "Last chance to back out, sir." His voice was calm, but Elias could hear the concern underneath. Elias smirked. "If I back out now, Earth will never hear the end of it." The Dominion had already spread the news across the galaxy. A human had challenged the Trial of Dominion. Billions were watching, expecting him to fail, to fall like every human before him. But Elias wasn't here to entertain them. He was here to win. The iron gates groaned as they opened, revealing a narrow tunnel that led into the heart of the arena. From inside, Elias could hear the roar of the crowd, the clash of weapons, the screams of the fallen. Carter hesitated. "You don't have to fight like them. Sir, use your training. Use your mind." Elias clapped his shoulder. "That's the plan." Then, without another word, he stepped into the tunnel. As Elias emerged into the arena, the sound of the crowd hit him like a wave. Thousands of alien spectators filled the towering stands, their eyes locked onto the battlefield below. Some chanted, some roared, others simply watched, waiting to see if this human would last more than a few minutes. The arena floor was a mix of sand and broken stone, littered with weapons and the bodies of fallen warriors. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. In the center of the battlefield, his opponents awaited. 10 warriors from different species, each stronger, faster, and more experienced than him. A towering insectoid with bladed arms clicked its mandibles, while a 4-armed reptilian warrior flexed its claws. A massive brute with thick, rock-like skin cracked its knuckles. They were bigger. They were stronger. But Elias was smarter. A deep voice echoed through the arena. "Let the trial begin." The first attack came instantly. The insectoid warrior lunged, its bladed arms slicing through the air. Elias barely dodged, rolling to the side as the blade cut through the sand where he had been standing. The creature was fast. Too fast. Elias had no time to think, only react. He grabbed a fallen short sword and swung, aiming low. The blade sliced into the insectoid's leg joint. A horrible screech filled the air as the creature collapsed, ichor spilling from the wound. 1 down. The reptilian warrior attacked next, its 4 arms moving in a blur. Elias knew he couldn't match its strength, so he didn't try. Instead, he used its momentum against it, sidestepping at the last second. The reptilian stumbled forward, and Elias delivered a powerful kick to the back of its knee, sending it crashing to the ground. He didn't stop. He grabbed a spear from the sand and drove it into the reptilian's exposed back. 2 down. The crowd gasped. A human had already taken down 2 opponents. This was not supposed to happen. The rock-skinned brute was next. It came at Elias like a storm, fists the size of boulders swinging wildly. Elias ducked, weaved, and moved. He couldn't harm the creature with brute force. Its skin was too thick. But it had eyes. Elias grabbed a handful of sand and threw it into the brute's face. The alien roared, momentarily blinded. That was all Elias needed. He jumped onto the brute's back, driving his blade into the soft spot behind its ear. 3 down. The arena fell silent. This was not luck. This was not desperation. This was strategy. The remaining warriors hesitated. They had seen humans before, weak, clumsy, outmatched. But Elias was different. He was adapting. He was thinking. And he was winning. Up in the grandstands, Supreme Chancellor Corzan watched with narrowed eyes. The other warlords muttered among themselves. The human fights dishonorably, one growled. Corzan remained silent. He had watched thousands of warriors enter the trial, but this one was different. He was not the strongest. He was not the fastest. But he was something far more dangerous. He was unpredictable. Back in the arena, Elias faced his last 2 opponents, a pair of twin warriors with razor-sharp blades attached to their forearms. They moved in perfect sync, attacking from both sides at once. Elias didn't panic. He had learned something important. They expected a fight of strength, but humans didn't fight fair. As the first warrior slashed at him, Elias ducked and grabbed the fallen body of another fighter, using it as a shield. The twin's blade sank deep into its fallen comrade instead of Elias. The second warrior hesitated for just a second, just long enough for Elias to strike. He drove his blade into the warrior's throat, then spun and slammed his elbow into the other's jaw. The second warrior staggered. Elias wasted no time. He grabbed a dagger from the sand and ended it. The battlefield was quiet. Elias was the last one standing. The voice of the arena announcer boomed across the battlefield. The human has won the first round. Silence. Then the crowd erupted. Some roared in outrage. Others cheered, thrilled by the unexpected victory. Up in the stands, Corzan allowed himself a small, approving nod. This human was not weak. He was dangerous, and the real battle had only just begun. The battlefield was still stained with blood and dust when Elias Vance stepped away from the bodies of his fallen opponents. The first round of the trial of Dominion was over. He had won. Above him, the massive crowd of alien spectators erupted into a mix of cheers, growls, and angry roars. Some were impressed. Others were furious that a human had dared to survive. But none could ignore the truth. Elias was still standing. He exhaled slowly, scanning the battlefield. His uniform was torn, his muscles ached, and a deep cut on his arm still dripped blood. But pain didn't matter. He had proven that humans were not weak. Now, he had to keep proving it. A booming voice echoed through the arena. The human survives round 1. But the real test begins now. The iron gates at the edge of the battlefield groaned open. A new wave of warriors stepped forward, faster, stronger, deadlier. These were not like the first. These were the Dominion's true champions, and they were here to kill them. In the high stands, Supreme Chancellor Corzan leaned forward, watching Elias with sharp, thoughtful eyes. The other warlords spoke among themselves, their voices a mix of irritation and curiosity. "The human is tricky," a reptilian warlord hissed. "He is dishonorable," another growled. But Corzan raised a hand, silencing them. "He is alive. That is all that matters." The warlords exchanged glances. No warrior had ever fought like Elias. He was not the strongest, nor the fastest, But he was something far more dangerous, unpredictable. Back on the battlefield, Elias wiped the sweat from his forehead and focused. He had seconds to think before the next fight began. The first round had been a test. This was the real war. 6 new warriors now stood before him. Each one was different, each one deadly. The first was a towering brute with armor-like skin, carrying a massive battle axe. The second, a reptilian with a segmented tail, its venomous fangs glistening in the light. The third, a lean feline-like warrior, its claws sharper than steel. The fourth, a monstrous, insectoid creature, its mandibles twitching hungrily. The last 2 were twin gladiators, both armed with long, curved blades. They moved in perfect sync, their glowing eyes fixed on Elias. The crowd roared. The announcer's voice echoed through the air. Begin. The armored brute attacked first, swinging its axe with terrifying force. Elias dove to the side, the blade barely missing his head. The ground split where it struck, sending a wave of dust into the air. Before Elias could counter, the reptilian lashed its tail toward him. He barely managed to dodge, feeling the air shift as the venom-tipped blade passed just inches from his face. Too close. He had to move, had to think faster than them. Instead of attacking head-on, Elias did what no other warrior would do. He ran. The audience gasped as he sprinted across the battlefield, weaving between ruins and broken weapons. The 6 warriors gave chase. They thought he was retreating. They were wrong. Elias reached a fallen stone pillar and leaped behind it. His enemies followed, right into his trap. He had counted on their aggression. They expected a direct fight. But Elias fought like a human, with strategy. As the reptilian lunged, Elias grabbed a broken spear from the ground and threw it. The weapon struck the creature's exposed throat. It collapsed, gurgling as dark blood spilled into the sand. 1 down. The feline warrior was next, leaping at him with inhuman speed. Elias rolled beneath it, grabbed a dagger from the ground, and slashed upward as the creature flew past. The blade tore through its exposed stomach. It landed hard, twitching once before going still. 2 down. The insectoid creature hissed, charging forward. Elias dodged, grabbed a fallen shield, and smashed it against the creature's mandibles. A sharp crack filled the air as its head twisted unnaturally. It collapsed. 3 down. The twins attacked next, their curved blades slicing through the air in perfect harmony. Elias ducked, weaved, dodged, his movements just barely keeping him alive. They were fast, too fast for him to counter directly. So he did something unexpected. He grabbed a handful of sand and threw it into one warrior's eyes. The alien screeched, blinded. The second twin hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Elias to strike. 1 precise stab to the heart. The first twin collapsed. The second, still blinded, never saw Elias coming. A quick, brutal slash ended it. 5 down. Now, only the brute remained. It was breathing heavily, watching Elias with something close to respect. This human had killed 5 warriors in minutes. But the brute was not afraid. With a roar, it raised its battle axe for a final strike. Elias had no weapons left, no tricks. He had one chance. As the axe came down, Elias moved toward it, not away. He slipped under the brute's swing and leaped onto its massive back. Before it could react, he wrapped his arm around its thick neck and squeezed. The brute staggered, struggled, fell, and then it stopped moving. 6 down. The crowd exploded. Some cheered. Some screamed in rage. But none could deny the truth. Elias had won. Again. He stood in the center of the battlefield, covered in blood and sweat. His heart pounded. His body ached. But he was still standing. Above, Supreme Chancellor Corazon rose from his throne, watching Elias with deep interest. "This human is dangerous," a warlord muttered. Corazon nodded. "Yes, and that is why he will be tested further." He turned to the arena announcer. Advance him to the final stage. Elias heard the words and exhaled slowly. The final round. The last battle. The ultimate test. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for humanity's place among the stars. And he wasn't going to lose. Elias Vance stood in the middle of the battlefield, his breathing heavy, his body aching. Blood, his and others, soaked his torn uniform. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, dust, and death. The second round of the trial of Dominion was over. He had faced 6 of the galaxy's fiercest warriors and won. The crowd above was wild, their voices a mix of cheers, disbelief, and outrage. No human had ever come this far. They had expected him to fall, to be crushed like the others before him. But Elias was still standing. And now, the final round awaited. From the high stands, Supreme Chancellor Corazon rose from his throne. The ancient warlord's red eyes gleamed as he raised a hand, silencing the crowd. Human, you have proven your skill. Your mind is sharp, your tactics ruthless. But now you will face your greatest challenge. Elias wiped the sweat from his forehead and straightened. He had expected this. The Dominion would not let him win so easily. Corazon gestured toward the massive iron gates at the far end of the arena. With a loud groan, the doors began to open, revealing the single warrior. The crowd gasped. Even the warlords exchanged glances. Elias narrowed his eyes. His final opponent was not some mindless brute, not a beast relying on strength alone. No, this warrior was different. Tall, lean, and clad in black armor, the challenger moved with calculated precision. A deep red cape flowed behind him, and a long spear rested in his hands. His eyes, glowing silver, locked onto Elias with a quiet intensity. Corazon's voice echoed across the arena. Human, meet your final test. Commander Varrock of the Dominion's elite guard, a warrior who has never been defeated. Elias felt his muscles tense. He had faced monsters, brutes, and beasts before. But this was something else entirely. Varrock was a soldier, a tactician, a killer, the Dominion's finest. And now Elias had to defeat him. Varrock stepped onto the battlefield with slow, deliberate movements. He was calm, controlled. There was no arrogance in his stance, no unnecessary gestures. He simply watched Elias, studying, calculating. Elias adjusted his grip on his weapon. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to stop, to rest, to run. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. He had come too far. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Begin. Elias barely had time to react. Varrock moved like a shadow, his spear striking like lightning. Elias dodged, the blade missing his throat by inches. He countered with a slash of his own, but Varrock twisted away, faster than any warrior Elias had faced. A second strike, a third, each one precise, deadly, unrelenting. Elias blocked, barely keeping up. His heart pounded. He had fought stronger opponents before, but none this fast, none this skilled. Varrock wasn't just attacking randomly. He was testing Elias, looking for weaknesses, and the moment he found one, it would be over. Elias needed a new plan. Now, he took a step back, slowing his movements, watching, learning. Varrock was disciplined, efficient, but he was predictable. Elias had seen soldiers like him before, warriors trained for perfection, and perfection had a weakness. It had patterns. Varrock attacked again, his spear aiming for Elias's ribs. But this time, Elias didn't just dodge, he redirected. Twisting at the last second, he caught the spear with his forearm and yanked it forward. The move forced Varrock off balance, just for a moment. But a moment was all Elias needed. He slammed his elbow into Varrock's chest, forcing him back. The crowd gasped. A human had landed a hit on the undefeated warrior. Varrock's silver eyes flickered, but his face remained unreadable. He acknowledged the strike with a small nod. Then, without warning, he changed his attack. Faster, sharper, unpredictable. Dan. Varrock had learned from Elias just as quickly as Elias had learned from him. Now, the real fight had begun. The battle raged across the arena, both fighters moving in a blur of motion. Sand and dust flew into the air as weapons clashed, bodies twisted, and counterattacks were exchanged. The crowd was silent now, watching in awe. For the first time in the history of the Dominion, a human and an elite commander were evenly matched. Elias's body screamed with exhaustion, but his mind remained sharp. He couldn't overpower Varrock. He couldn't outmatch his speed, but he could outthink him. Elias faked a stumble, letting his knees buckle just slightly. Varrock took the bait. He lunged forward, aiming to finish the fight. But Elias was already moving. He twisted, using the last of his strength to sidestep and strike. His blade found Varrock's exposed side. A sharp gasp escaped the elite warrior as the tip of Elias's weapon sank into his armor, piercing flesh. Silence. Then, Varrock stepped back, gripping his side. Blood dripped onto the sand. For the first time in his life, Commander Varrock had been wounded. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some roared in fury, others in sheer disbelief. Elias Vance, the human, had broken the impossible. And he wasn't done yet. Varrock straightened, breathing heavily. He looked down at his wound, then at Elias. Slowly, he let out a small, quiet chuckle. Then, to the shock of the entire arena, he lowered his spear. Corzin stood from his throne. The warlord stared in stunned silence. Varrock had just yielded. The undefeated warrior had surrendered to a human. Corzin's voice echoed across the arena. The human has won the trial of Dominion. Elias barely processed the words. His vision blurred. His body screamed for rest. But he had done it. He had proven humanity's strength. The battle was over. Or so he thought. Elias Vance stood in the center of the battlefield, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The sharp taste of blood lingered in his mouth, and his muscles burned with exhaustion. Across from him, Commander Varrock, the undefeated warrior of the Dominion, stood with his spear lowered. A thin stream of blood dripped from his side, a wound Elias had given him. And then, before the eyes of the entire Dominion, Varrock bowed his head. The arena fell into silence. No one had expected this. No one had even considered the possibility that a human could stand victorious against the Dominion's finest warrior. Supreme Chancellor Corzin rose from his throne, his red eyes narrowing. He had seen many battles in his long life, but never one like this. Commander Varrock, he said, his voice calm but firm. Do you yield? Varrock took a deep breath and lifted his gaze to meet the Chancellor's. Yes, a single word, one that changed everything. The silence in the arena shattered as the crowd erupted. Some roared in outrage, their fury shaking the very walls of the Colosseum. Others cheered in disbelief, unable to process what they had just witnessed. A human had won the trial of Dominion. Elias should have felt relief, should have felt triumph. But instead, he felt something else. Unease. He had proven himself. He had fought and survived. But what now? He had no illusions about the Dominion. They did not tolerate weakness. They did not accept defeat. Even with this victory, his fight was far from over. Corzin stepped forward, his long cloak billowing behind him. The Supreme Chancellor of the Dominion was a powerful figure, taller than any human, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through Elias. You have won, human, he said, his voice carrying across the arena. You have proven your strength. And now, you may claim your prize. Elias narrowed his eyes. What prize? He hadn't come here for riches or power. He had fought to show that humanity deserved a place among the stars, that they weren't weak, that they weren't prey. And yet, as Corzin gestured toward him, he realized that the Dominion had something else in mind. A large reinforced gate, at the side of the arena began to open. The crowd fell silent again, watching with curiosity. Even Varrock turned to see what was happening. And then Elias heard it, the deep, rumbling growl of something massive. His grip tightened on his weapon. From the darkness of the gate, a creature emerged. Towering, armored, and covered in thick, dark scales, the beast was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Its glowing yellow eyes locked onto him with pure primal hunger. Long, razor-sharp claws dug into the stone beneath it as it stepped forward. It was a predator, a true monster, a final test. Korzen's voice echoed once more. "You have won the trial, human. Now, prove you are worthy of your victory. Take what you desire, if you can survive." The meaning was clear. One last fight. One last battle for dominance. Elias felt his heart pound in his chest. He was tired. Wounded, he had barely survived his battle with Varrock. And now they expected him to face this. The beast let out a deafening roar, the sound vibrating through the arena. The crowd began to chant, their voices blending together in a single deafening word. Fight, fight, fight. Elias exhaled slowly, gripping his weapon. He didn't have a choice. The fight wasn't over. The beast lunged. Elias rolled to the side, barely avoiding the massive claws that tore into the stone where he had stood moments ago. Dust and debris flew into the air as the creature twisted, faster than anything that size should be. It wasn't just strong, it was smart. Elias knew he couldn't win with brute force. He had to think. He scanned the arena. The ground was littered with broken weapons, cracked stone, and shattered armor from previous battles. His only chance was using his environment. The beast roared again and charged. Elias waited until the last second, then ran straight toward it. The audience gasped. At the last possible moment, he dove beneath the creature, sliding across the sand and grabbing a jagged spear tip from the ground. The beast twisted, its massive tail swinging toward him. Elias jumped back, barely escaping its reach. He needed a weak spot, somewhere to strike. Worthy of what? All eyes turned to Commander Varrock. The elite warrior stepped forward, his silver eyes locked onto Elias. His wound had been treated, but the memory of their battle was still fresh. Varrock stopped a few feet from Elias and studied him in silence. Then he looked up at Korzen. "He did not just survive," Varrock said. "He won. He defeated me. He defeated the beast. We cannot pretend that didn't happen." Elias tensed. What was Varrock doing? The warrior turned back to him, and for the first time, Elias saw something new in his expression. Respect. Varrock raised his voice so the entire arena could hear. "If he is strong enough to defeat our greatest warriors, then he is strong enough to stand among us." The crowd exploded into chaos. Some shouted in outrage, others in agreement. The warlords argued among themselves. Elias clenched his fists. Was this it? Was this his chance? Korzen let the noise continue for a few moments before raising his hand again. Silence fell once more. The Supreme Chancellor's gaze fell on Elias. "Human," he said, "you have fought. You have won. Now speak." Elias hesitated. He could feel every single eye in the arena on him. This was his moment, his chance to decide his own fate. He straightened his back, lifted his chin, and spoke. "I did not come here to beg for a place," he said. His voice was steady, strong. "I came to prove that humanity is not weak, that we deserve respect." The warlords listened, their expressions unreadable. Elias continued, "If you wish to cast me out, then do it. But you all saw what happened here today. You saw what I can do. If the Dominion values strength above all else, then you already have your answer." The arena was dead silent. Then Korzen chuckled. It was a deep, rumbling sound. His red eyes gleamed with something close to amusement. "You are bold, human, and you are correct." He turned to the warlords. "The Dominion values strength, and today This human has proven his. Another pause. Then, Corazon nodded once. The human stays. The decision struck the arena like lightning. Some warlords looked furious, others looked satisfied. The crowd erupted into a storm of voices. Elias felt his stomach tighten. He had won. But what did that truly mean? Varrock stepped forward, meeting Elias's gaze. "Welcome to the Dominion." His voice was quiet, but Elias could feel the weight behind it. He had earned his place. But deep down, he knew. His real battles were only just beginning. Elias Vance stood in the grand hall of the Dominion, his body still aching from the brutal trials he had endured. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and the whispers of warlords discussing the Supreme Chancellor's decision. The human stays. The words echoed in his mind. He had won his right to stand among them, but victory did not bring peace. It only brought new challenges. Elias could feel the eyes of every warlord on him. Some were filled with respect, others with hatred. He was not one of them, and many believed he never would be. Commander Varrock approached, his footsteps echoing against the stone floor. The warrior had been his greatest opponent, and now Elias wasn't sure if he was his greatest ally or something else. Varrock stopped a few steps away and crossed his arms. "You fought well, human. Few warriors have ever bested me in battle." Elias held his gaze. "And yet, you still doubt me." Varrock's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "I doubt many things, but the battlefield does not lie." The Supreme Chancellor Corazon rose from his throne, his long robe sweeping across the floor. His red eyes gleamed with curiosity and something else, calculation. "You have been accepted into the Dominion, Elias Vance," Corazon said. "But now you must decide what to do with that honor." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" Corazon gestured toward the assembled warlords. "Some of my council still question your place among us. Some even wish to challenge it. Asterisk, asterisk." At that, a few warlords murmured in agreement, their gazes sharp and unfriendly. Corazon continued, "But the Dominion does not only test strength in combat. We test it in war, in leadership, in conquest." Elias felt his chest tighten. Was this another challenge? Corazon's lips curled into a slow smirk. "So, human, will you claim what you desire?" The meaning was clear. They would not simply give him a place. He had to take it. Elias glanced at Varrock, who studied him with interest. The Dominion was not a place where one could survive by being passive. If he stayed, he had to fight for his position every single day. He thought about Earth, about the way humanity had been looked down upon by the Dominion for years, treated as weak, unworthy. No more. Elias straightened his back and looked Corazon in the eyes. "I didn't come here to watch from the sidelines." He exhaled slowly, then spoke the words that would change his life forever. "I will fight for my place. I will rise." The warlords murmured again, but Corazon let out a satisfied chuckle. "Good." Varrock stepped forward and unsheathed a dagger from his belt. He turned it in his hand and offered it to Elias. "Then prove it." Elias took the blade without hesitation. The test was not over. It was only beginning. The ceremony of the blade. Elias stood in a dark chamber deep within the Dominion stronghold. Only a few torches lit the space, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Before him, 4 warlords stood, watching, judging. Varrock stood to the side, arms crossed. He had explained the ritual. If Elias truly wanted to be recognized, he had to carve his place into the Dominion's history. A massive stone slab stood at the center of the room, covered in ancient markings. It bore the names of warriors who had proven themselves, names of those who had risen above all others. Elias took a deep breath and stepped forward. The dagger in his hand felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. He pressed the tip of the blade against the stone. This was it. The moment he became more than just a human who survived. The moment he became part of the Dominion. With steady hands, he carved his name into the rock. Elias Vance. The scraping sound of metal against stone echoed through the chamber. Each letter was a statement. Each cut was a challenge to those who doubted him. When he finished, he stepped back. Silence. Then, one by one, the warlords nodded, some with respect, some with reluctant acceptance, but none could deny what had just happened. A human's name was now written into the history of the Dominion. Varrock gave him a slow nod. It is done. Elias let out a slow breath. He had taken the first step. But he knew this was far from the end. His real journey was just beginning. Later that night, Elias stood on a balcony overlooking the massive Dominion capital. The city stretched for miles, glowing with the lights of warships and towering fortresses. Varrock stepped beside him. "You made your choice," the warrior said. "But do you truly understand what it means?" Elias glanced at him. "I do." Varrock smirked. "Then prove it." Elias chuckled. "I intend to." The Dominion had tried to break him. They had tried to test him. But now he was part of them. And soon they would learn that humans were more than just survivors. They were conquerors. The end, or the beginning.